Well, good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. It's a holiday weekend. And I thought, at Lamar Avenue, I was told when I would hire on that a lot of times the faces will be totally different on holiday weekends. You'll have a lot of people going, you'll have different people that show up, but he said it's a common thing. Jared and the team said that people leave Paris to go see folks on holiday weekends. I thought, well, we're going to talk about the present today, when many aren't. So, sorry, that was the best I could do. All right. So last week, Jared talked about our past, and he included a story about the guys, if you remember, the heart doctors, and they talked about the fact that they went to the burger place after, and he said, don't we feel bad about this? And then one of them said, well, I took my name tag off. And I think that is so important for us to keep that story, or at least something similar to that idea that we have these different name tags that we take off or we put on at different times where we go, if we're going to understand this one life. And so over and over again this week, I kept going back to that statement. He also, last week, Jared had talked about the fact that there were several faulty conclusions by great minds such as Sigmund Freud, René Descartes, and Mater from Cars. And I thought, I'm going to have to work really hard this week to come up with 3 people that I could contrast like that. But this week we're talking about lies and truth about the present. And what I want to do is I want to spend time in Philippians 4. And you're probably going to want to get out your Bibles or have it on your phone. Philippians 4, 1 through 14, because we may refer back to this throughout the sermon. So Philippians 4, 1 through 14. And we've been many times into Philippians 4 and Philippians 4:13. You can't go to a football game without seeing Philippians 4:13. You can't win a state championship without having Philippians 4:13 show up. And in fact, I think there's a million other applications people would use for Philippians 4:13 or why they accomplish the great things that they accomplish. Most of us have Philippians 4:13 where if I started it, you could say the rest. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? And I know that this is something most of you know now, but that when you use it to win a state championship, or you say that's why you won a state championship, that is not the context of Philippians 4:13. Paul is not at the zenith of his career in Philippians 4. He's not at that point where he's saying, and I've accomplished all these things and can do even more, simply because Christ is in me. And that's where we're going to go today. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. And I'll say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Yet it was good of you to share in my troubles. So, Paul's not in the state championship, right? Now, he's done many, many things bigger. But Paul is in the middle of a bunch of mess, isn't he? And even in the context of this, from the beginning, there is discord. There are at least two women who can't seem to get along. And he pleads with them. He says, please be of one mind. You've worked so hard with me. And he talks about these other people, but he says, please, get along. There's discord. There's anxiety. How do I know there's anxiety? Well, he says, don't be anxious, right? Don't be anxious. And in fact, I believe there's a good case to be made that when he tells them these things in Philippi, that you can imagine, based on what he tells them, that there are all the opposites of true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy things going on. Why can I assume that? Because he tells them to think about those things. Because there's all kinds of other things going on. And then Paul, speaking into a situation of discord, of anxiety, of problems, and of all the negative things, all the toxic thoughts, he says, here's what you do. Be peacemakers, right? Work with these people. Be joyful. Rejoice. 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 It's a great song, by the way. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I'll say rejoice. He says it 3 times in this. And so rejoice. Be thankful. Be filled with thanksgiving. And rely on God. And meditate on what really could be considered just another phrasing of the fruits of the Spirit. Paul says, I know you're going through all these different things. I know there's all this trouble. I know there's all this anxiety. I know there's this, we'd call it today, depression going on, and all this toxic thought, all this noise. Jared called it 2 weeks ago the disquieted soul. There's a lot of disquiet here. And Paul says, there's a solution. Paul says, rejoice, be thankful. And you can do anything through him who gives me strength. And I just want to dive into that a little bit today, because there are many weeks where I can spend from Monday all the way through until Sunday morning when I get here early. And my mind just keeps going back to my preparation of my sermon and my discussion with the Lord throughout the weeks. And throughout the week, I'll just have these moments and I'll go, thanks for that, thanks for that. And I'll just try and be living out what I know I'm going to preach on Sunday morning. And it's almost like I am trying to fool myself and say I can multitask and actually do all the other things and still be constantly thinking about my sermon. And this week, we were supposed to close on a house on Monday. We then closed on a house on Wednesday, after being told we probably wouldn't close on a house on Wednesday, that it might be Thursday or Friday. And I needed to be out of the rent house that I was in by today. And then as we've moved into the house, which I love the house. I like the house. But there were elements of this decision that have caused me a great deal of disquiet, anxiety, frustration, irritation. And I've been teaching on Wednesday night about having eyes to see and ears to hear and transcendent thoughts. And I've had all week to simply live out what I'm going to preach today. And it has been difficult. And so I've had several conversations on the way to Home Depot for the 7th time yesterday. 7th time in 3 days. I said, Lord, help. Not because I was so worried about what I was trying to fix, but because my attitude was so terrible about having to fix it. I owned a house for 25 years we owned houses? I worked on other people's houses. I did remodel construction, all this different stuff, all the things. For 6.5 years, if I've had a problem, I call the landlord or the property manager. Now I want to make a phone call. Dishwasher doesn't work, right? And I have been really trying to readjust to a different mode of being this week. And so I told Melody, I'm just not going to look at you today as I try and preach and tell you good people how to transcend all of this stuff and live in the present, the truth, not the lies. Well, I keep looking at her anyway, mainly just so she can. Anyway. But there are a lot of lies that come at us. A lot of different things that come at us about our present. Jared talked about the noise of our past, but I want to talk about our present. When we're in the thick of it, when we're in the middle of it. And I'm going to start with the assumption that we're kind of where Paul is or has recently been when he writes all this, and that is that he's had to get through stuff. That he's telling them, you're going to have to overcome stuff. You're going to have to stand firm. You're going to have to get past. You're going to have to work together. And he knows there's all the toxicity, or he knows there's all the problems. And maybe there's been loss. So here's some lies that come at us. Everything happens for a reason, right? I don't believe that. It was just their time. I don't believe that. By the way, I'm not telling you can't believe these things. I'm saying I'm going to throw these out there as things that I believe that are not true fully. God won't give you more than you can handle. I don't believe that for a moment. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And the associated, but bears will kill you. And then God is punishing me. God is punishing me. I think all of those things, and at least in some way, I would want to say, I get maybe where they see that even in Scripture on some of those things, but I don't believe that's what's going on in this case. I just don't think that's true. But truth is less easy to take sometimes, to face up to deal with. You see, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Maybe, has a moment, but hurt people, right? Sin and death are still trying to wrest power away from God in this fallen creation. And we're all broken. We're just broken in different places. And yes, it's true that some things happen and there's a reason, maybe. But sometimes things just stink. It's just a mess. It's just awful. It's just bad. And we don't need somebody to tell us, well, God won't give you more than you can handle. We need somebody to just be with us and let us talk about how bad it is at that moment. Now, I'll also say, well, we talk about this at the beginning. I will say God does discipline those he loves, but part of that discipline is allowing me to deal with the natural consequences of my actions. There are times where, like in the book of Daniel with Belteshazzar or whatever his name is, that king, that I could be weighed and measured and found wanting by God. And the reality is he might just test me to see me approved or see what I'm made of. But if we step on the scale in the bathroom and we feel punished by God, it probably has more to do with the diet and exercise that we do rather than God punishing us for our choices. And so we have to face reality. And reality is our friend. Reality is our friend. If you don't know how much money you have in the bank, and you write a check, hoping it will be okay, but you're unwilling to check to see how much money you have in the bank, that's not a good practice. And if you constantly find yourself avoiding knowing a circumstance, that constant state of denial, then your present is actually not what it should be. Reality is our friend. So the second thing I want to say here is that we don't see the whole picture. We don't see the whole picture. And that is that whether it's good times or whether it's bad times, we only get a fraction of what's really going on. We only have one little bit of the story. First, there's the continual earthly story going around with all of the things that are going on in everybody's life but yours. And while, yes, you are the center of your world sometimes, right? It's important to acknowledge that maybe there are things beyond you that are going on in all the stories that maybe we don't see. But we also, if we are Christians, followers of God, we should have eyes that help us to see above the chaos and ears to hear beyond the noise. There ought to be ways to approach the throne of grace even when we can't get up off the floor sometimes. We have to have an awareness that there is more going on than meets the eye. And we have to do that whether it's blessings or what we perceive as curses. What do I mean by that? If I'm just struggle after struggle after struggle, I might find myself taking what should be a positive thing and toxic thoughts just creep straight in. I feel real bad about how overall things are going, and I'm struggling, and God is going, man, you have no idea how much you are growing and how many positive things you're going to be able to do because of what you're dealing with right now. That could be going on, and it may be going on. But we can find ourselves just getting this cycle of negativity. So, I don't know if this is the best time to say it. Melody probably told me that it wasn't a good idea, but I'm going to say it anyway. But here's what a toxic thought creeping in looks like for me. So I'm in my Chrysler 200, and I've got Ricky this morning, and Ricky and I are going through the drive-thru at the donut shop. Don't judge me. That's a Sunday morning thing. And so we're going through the drive-thru at the donut shop, and as I'm starting to talk to Ricky about something, all of a sudden the radio pops on. The radio does not work in my Chrysler 200. The radio hasn't worked in my Chrysler 200 since Samantha gave it back to me several years ago. It doesn't work. And the radio came on, and it was playing a station, right? And so it was talk radio, so I switched. I thought, I wonder what CDs in the thing. I told Ricky, I said, the radio hadn't worked. So I hit eject and pull out the CD. That I couldn't do, right? And I pull the CD out, and I realized, hey, this is cool. It's Hall & Oates. Plug it in, and it plays. And I'm listening to Hall & Oates. Ricky and I are enjoying, the great Hall & Oates old songs. And I'm having all these positive feelings like, man, yesterday was just a struggle, and it was quite a week. My radio works, and I've got a CD player in my car. And I started to think about positive things. And then I had this toxic thought. And if this is too close to some of you, I apologize, but I can't help myself. But you've all been around people who are about to pass away, right? And they've been non-responsive for days, right? And you reach a point where you think, it wouldn't even matter if I stayed today. I could get away and go do something, but you stay. And then all of a sudden that moment comes. And it happens so often, right? Where you walk into the room and they just light up and they're them, right? That's terrible grammar. But you realize for a moment they're lucid. They're having a conversation with you. They're remembering, and it's like you have this tremendous moment of peace. And by the way, I always see that as a gift of God, and I've talked to so many hospice workers that talk about that. But they also say this is so common in the last 12 hours of life. And I thought, maybe my car is about to quit on me. So I don't know if that's just too big of a roller coaster for us to think about, but that's the toxic kind of thing. Have you ever done that, where something good happens and you go, well, but maybe it's just this? That's accepting some of the lies of the present. But the other thing is, if things are going well, It's said that money can cover a multitude of sins. Right? If you've got enough money, you can make a lot of bad choices. You can get by with a lot of things. And if you've got a good credit score, you can continue to act like you're better than you are. A lot of different ways. And a lot of times when we see people with material blessings, or we just see life going well for them, we say, well, they are blessed. Right? And we even say it for ourselves, well, I was just really blessed. And that, by the way, can be thanksgiving, and often is, and there's nothing wrong with that. But have you ever found yourself reaching a point in life where when you look back on it, you realize and thought, wow, I just felt like I was walking right along with God there, and I would have thought, man, I was blessed. Everything was just fine. And then you turn around and realize you were completely separating yourself from God during that time. That you had just begun to operate as if you didn't even need God. That you'd begun to do your day-to-day as if He didn't even matter. And you look back on that and you go, was I being blessed? Or was that actually rain and sunshine that comes to both the just and the unjust? Is it possible that we accept all kinds of good things and we just assume that we're just in great shape with God? And maybe what we need to think about is, well, am I blessed? Or am I just rolling along as if I don't even need God? All right, so reality's our friend. There's a whole lot more going on than meets the eye in any situation, blessings or struggles. And the last part of this is that we're not alone. We're simply not alone. Paul has this fellowship and help from the disciples in Philippi. He tells them later in Philippians 4, he says, when I was in a bond, you helped me, and that was to your credit. And he said, and I'm praising you not so you give me more. He said, I just want to tell you, that's to your credit with God, and that's a wonderful thing. You should feel good about that. And thank you for helping. But he shared his struggles with the church in Philippi, and they shared with him. And so we have each other when we go through struggles in the present. But he also says, you've got the peace of God, right? The peace of God that transcends understanding. That peace of God that allows you to recognize that no matter what's going on, there's something beyond, and I can rest and have peace in knowing that it's okay. Somehow, I'm in good hands. Not everything happens for a reason, but maybe the Romans 8:28, despite this, God can take this and turn and bring good out of it. Whatever it is. He can take a cross and bring redemption. He can take a broken down car and turn it into something good. He can do anything. And so we can have that peace which transcends understanding. That peace of God. But just like he says rejoice multiple times to kind of get people's attention, he does something with peace of God. Early he said the peace of God will be yours. And then he prays that the God of peace will be with them. And I want you to, in your mind, take that for a moment and just move them around. The peace of God and the God of peace. If you can't get close to the peace of God because of all the noise and all the chaos and all the struggles and all the issues, and you're having trouble getting close to the peace of God, then draw close to the God of peace. Have the conversation. Cry out. Shout out. Be that guy driving down Collegiate towards Home Depot going, Lord, help my frustration. Please make me nicer to my wife by the time I get back home. Draw near to the God of peace so that the peace of God will come to you. And so now listen, in light of all that, what Paul says again, I have learned, Paul says, to be content whatever the circumstances. We'll talk about things you're never going to get to fully. I still haven't learned to be content whatever the circumstance. Paul says he has. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things. I can get through anything through Him who gives me strength. Paul says you can have all of these things going on, all these struggles, all these issues, and the answer is Jesus. The answer is God. And so I want us to think just for a moment, and I always feel like I need to quote sources. Sometimes I think it's better, I was told it was better sometimes, not worry about quoting the source and just tell you, nothing I ever say here is original. And if you ever want to know where I got something cool, just ask me and I'll tell you. But I read this. We are the most professionally medicated civilization to ever exist. Right? We're also the most professionally entertained civilization to ever exist. Life expectancies higher in most countries than they've ever been. The measures secularly of the prosperity and the things that should give us happiness are higher than they've ever been. And the suicide rates are alarmingly climbing to rates never seen. All kinds of mental illness, all kinds of struggles. 1 in 3 children under the age of 18, teenagers, I should say, diagnosed with some kind of anxiety or depression. And there's certainly a reality that clinical depression and chemical imbalances are a fact of human existence. There are things wrong with us that can be fixed, some of us with medication, that can be addressed with all kinds of strategies that address clinical issues. And there's certainly a place for there's a godly place rather for Christian psychologists, psychiatrists, and counselors. The last thing I would want you to hear me say is that if you're struggling with depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts or all kinds of other issues, that you shouldn't seek professional help. You should seek professional help. But the fact of the matter is, many of the people that desperately need that, well, they don't have that. And so while there is a need for professionals like that, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, I'm none of those. I'm none of those. What I can offer, and what we as the church can offer, is the peace of King Jesus. And I can say, rejoice. And I can say, don't be anxious. And I can say, spend time in thanksgiving and meditate on the fruit of the Spirit and draw close to God and worship and give yourself to Him. And I can say those things. And I can almost just hear somebody ask this question: what if we offered Jesus to somebody who's got all of those struggles and nothing else? What if we offered Jesus and all of His way and all of His opportunities and all of His and nothing else? Well, the fact of the matter is, as I just said, most people don't get counselors or psychiatrists or psychologists if they're not at least middle class. And it's upper middle class and beyond that takes the most advantage of some of the most beneficial mental health. And most lower income folks don't have a way to pay for a level of counseling that they can afford. They just can't pay for it. And so they do without. And so in reality, Jesus is the only one that's for everybody. Jesus is the only way that for 2,000 years has been the solution for anybody that's struggling. And while I would never say you shouldn't take advantage of all those other things if you find yourself in a situation where you just can't get past a level of problem, what if we offered clinical and professional secular care? What if the church just said, we're just going to do that? Clinical and professional secular care and not Jesus. We're just going to try and solve the world's mental health crisis with all the professional and clinical help that we could offer. And how is that working where people are taking the most advantage of it? See, I don't necessarily know what happens when people turn completely to Jesus 100% and are transformed from the inside out by the Spirit of God. I don't know necessarily what happens chemically or clinically in their brains. I don't know. But I do know what's happening to an entire society that's not turning to Jesus and that thinks that the psychiatrists and psychologists and clinicians and prescribers and YouTubers and anybody else is going to offer them the solution to the struggles that they have today. And the direction that we're going is more and more medication and more counseling and more suicides and problems. Now, even mentioning that today, I would have to tell you, if this triggers something in you that you need to talk to somebody, you need to take advantage of that and seek professional help. Make that call to a hotline. Do those different things. Folks, don't stop there. In fact, don't start there. Start with Jesus. Start with trying to draw near to God. Start with giving yourself fully over to Him. Start with turning all your problems over to Him. He's not going to give you every answer the way that you might expect it. And He's certainly not going to prescribe medication. But for 2,000 years, and longer than that in the Hebrew text, God has given lots of working solutions to every problem that exists in this world. So I just have to give you Jesus and tell you to do things His way. And start with Jesus, and you need the other. So will I, probably. Not saying we don't, but start with Jesus. If you need prayers, if you're struggling, or if things are just great, if everything is perfect in your life right now, your radio works, your CD player, you got Sirius XM, and you love your car. If everything's rolling along and you realize, but I haven't prayed in 6 months. I haven't really had to get down on my knees in a year. I haven't found myself crying out to God. And if I think about it for a moment, I should have, even if it was just in repentance for all those things that I'm doing wrong. And this is an opportunity for you to come. We'll pray with you before, or we'll pray with you after the closing prayer. We'd be more than happy to get with you and visit. Come to Jesus this morning. Let's stand and sing.